It's now my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Congressman John Curtis. Mr. Curtis represents Utah's 3rd Congressional District. He was first sworn in and elected in November 2017. Since then, he's developed a reputation as someone who understands the importance of bipartisan collaboration, which is the spirit of National Clean Energy Week. Congressman Curtis is the founder and chair emeritus of the Conservative Climate Caucus. I only have 3 or 4 pages left.
Does anybody want to hear this?
Everyone,
okay, no.
Please help me welcome Congressman Curtis and future Senator of Utah.
So, and I don't know who's doing the mics, but I'm not standing here. Is that good? Oh, good. We're good. Is everybody having a good time? Clean energy is important? All right. Can we just celebrate for a moment that the Speaker of the House has a letter in his possession signed from how many? 18 Republican members of Congress that says, please be thoughtful. And can we celebrate for a moment that the Speaker has said, when it comes to the IRA, we will use a surgical response. And I think that's great. But before I go down there, I want to just share an experience with you, if I can, that those of you who have been to Utah, traveled Utah, will appreciate this. Yay, Utah. Yay. Thank you. There's 2 of you. 3, 4, okay, good, love it. So I was in my district several weeks ago, and it's a big district. It's 400 miles from the top to the bottom. There's really actually not a road that goes from the top to the bottom. I actually go through Colorado to get to the bottom of my district. And I was traveling, and we were driving along the road that Tom Hanks made famous with Forrest Gump. Do you know the spot where he had been running and he stopped? It's in Monument Valley. And so as you approach that area, if any of you have been there, the cars are starting to slow down. And it's actually pretty dangerous because everybody wants to stop there and take a picture. So we stopped, and as we stepped out of the car, we looked off to the east, and there was a double rainbow. One of them was fully complete, and the other one was partially complete. And then that was off to the east. If you looked off into the south, you saw Monument Valley and some of these amazing rock structures, if you've seen that. And then we looked off to the west, and the sun was setting, and it was so bright that we literally had a conversation about, is there a fire? That's how bright it was. And can you imagine that moment, standing there and being in that? And then we hopped in the car and we drove down to Kayenta, and the next day we were in Cedar Breaks, Utah, actually a relatively unknown part of our state that's just spectacular. And anyway, the reason I bring that up to start our discussion today is there a person on the planet that can experience that and not say to yourselves, we must leave this place better than we found it for our children? And if there's a nugget of what got me going as a Republican a number of years ago, it was this. And I worry so much that our dialogue is, oh, the science is this, oh, that's hooey, right? Oh, the science, and you go back and forth. By the way, has anybody in this room ever won a debate about science on climate? It doesn't happen, right? But I'll tell you what, if somebody's struggling, take them on that drive, show them what I saw, or of course, hundreds of different drives around our beautiful country, and then ask them if they want to leave the earth better than they found it. I started, it's interesting, we started the caucus here in DC, and it did very well, and you all know the story of that. Back home, I realized I was getting ahead of people, and they weren't coming as far along as they were in Washington, DC on climate. So I started holding dinners in my home, and I would invite 50 of the most far-right leaning people I could who really struggled with climate to my home for dinner. Well, funny thing, if you feed them, and then they're locked in your home, and we would talk for an hour, without exception, they walked away from that experience saying, I need to rethink how I view this. And I used to challenge them all. One of my challenges was to this. And it will sound kind of silly to you, but I'm telling you, in Utah, this is a thing. I said, look, I want you to go home tonight. I want you to go into the bathroom, and I want you to close the door, look in the mirror where nobody can hear you, and say the word climate. And they did exactly that. It scares them to death to even say the word climate by themselves. But they are learning to say it, and they're understanding why, from a Republican conservative perspective, this is important. And I believe strongly that without a conservative voice, that we make mistakes. And that by conservatives stepping up and being involved and engaged in this, we'll make better decisions. And I know that the narrative is false, that in order to be clean, you have to give up affordability, you have to give up reliability, you have to give up energy security for your country. And I think this is what's so valuable about what we're bringing to the debate is, look, we'll show you how to do it without losing affordability. We'll show you how to do it without losing reliability. We can stay energy, not just independent, but energy dominant, and we can be clean. That's a message that Republicans and conservatives, right of center, can get very excited about. So I'm so pleased to be part of it. I'm looking down here at Heather, and if many of you know Heather, John Curtis doesn't make this journey if he doesn't come to an event not too different than this in Washington, D.C., and listen to Heather up here on the stage. When I came here 7 years ago to Congress, I was longing for a way to talk about this as a Republican, and I couldn't find anybody 7 years ago that knew how to talk about that. And Heather, thank you. You were so much a big part of that. And today, let's just celebrate that the Conservative Climate Caucus has 85 House Republicans who today, thank you. Who today, if asked in a town hall meeting about climate, instead of having a debate about the science, instead of saying, oh, that's a bunch of hooey, they say, let us tell you our ideas. Let us tell you what we're doing about it. And that's a really good place to be. Well, listen, I'm a politician with a microphone, and I'm watching, I've got a few more minutes here. I can talk, but Heather and I talked about maybe it'd be fun to answer a few questions. So do you have any questions? And if not, Heather will ask me a few questions. Yeah. And you raised your hand on Utah, right? Are you a Utahn? Where from?
I'm from Salt Lake City. I grew up on the avenues.
Nice. East High?
East High School.
Skyline High?
Yeah, I know. That's a question every Utahn has to ask.
It's a thing in Utah, isn't it? Yeah.
It is definitely a thing.
Yeah.
So my question, I have a daughter who just moved out to Salt Lake, is living on the avenues where I grew up. She told me that a couple of weeks ago that Salt Lake had the 5th worst air quality in the world. And I know there's various reasons for that. I was out west this summer as well and experienced some of the wildfires. But would you attribute that mostly to climate change, or to what would you attribute those problems?
So when I first came to Congress, I had been the mayor of Provo, Utah. And as the mayor, the big issue was clean air and quality of air. And I had become, I think, pretty good about dealing with particulates in the air and things like that. And I came to Washington, D.C., and I was literally surprised that the conversation was not clean air, but it was carbon. And I would tell everybody what I had done for clean air, and they'd say, well, what are you doing for carbon? But interestingly, if you go back to Utah, they are more concerned about clean air. And by the way, if I want to get people talking about climate, it's a great entry point, because they all care about clean air in Utah. Utah has, for those of you not familiar with it, this, particularly the Salt Lake area, has this very unique characteristic, both good and bad. It's surrounded by mountains. And I'm not talking about hills. Out here, the Appalachian, those are hills. We have mountains. And when a high pressure system comes in, it traps all the air, and no air gets out during that period of time. So any particulate coming from a vehicle or all the other sources stays trapped down in the valley, and we get really, really poor air quality. So I think certainly there are ties to climate change, because a forest fire and all those particulates that end up in that valley is hugely problematic. And so some of the things that are results, it's impossible to say that they are not connected. But fundamentally in Utah, you kind of have to be able to talk particulates and carbon and realize that the solutions are very, very different. But yeah, over here, and then, yes.
Hey, thanks. So I'm not from Utah, unfortunately, so I can't ask a super specific question. But as you know, we have a new Congress coming up in January. Obviously, we don't know what that's going to look like yet. But do you know what sorts of priorities we're focusing on, especially with the Conservative Caucus? How's that going to look?
I love the question. Permitting reform, right? And I've got really good news and some bad news. The good news is everybody wants it. Isn't it hard to find a member, Republican or Democrat, that doesn't want permitting reform? The bad news is everybody has a different definition of what it is. And so, and even within Republican Party, even within the Democratic Party, and then particularly between Republicans and Democrats, and we're doing a lot of this. And so I can find any member and I sit down and, hey, let's do permitting reform. You bet, let's do it together. Here's my ideas. It's transmission. Well, mine's pipelines. Well, mine's and that's an oversimplification. And so we have some bills and proposals that are out there, and almost all of them have a lot of very good parts to them, but almost all of them are not comprehensive. So what do? Do we take bits and pieces, or do we wait for a comprehensive thing that gets everything? And I don't have a good answer to that. If we take bits and pieces, so for instance, let's say we do a transmission bill, a lot of Republicans are going to say, well, we'll never get to pipelines. And so we're not going to do a transmission. They'll hold it hostage. And then this kind of reminds me, by the way, of immigration. We have the same thing going on with immigration. Do you do comprehensive or do you do it piece by piece? So I don't have a good answer, but I can tell you, as far as the Curtis team, permitting reform. How can we be involved in it? How can we be a bridge in bringing all of these different approaches together so that in a perfect world we get a very comprehensive bill? Nobody knows this better than this room. A lot of the money in the IRA will never be spent if we don't get permitting reform. In my opinion, worse than that, there is no path to 2050, clean or unclean, either way, that meets our energy needs without permitting reform. And I think people are seeing that. A lot of good discussions and healthy discussions about it, but nobody yet has really come up with the bill that everybody can support. Yes.
Hi, Lori Pickford from BPC. I want to kick off on permitting. The Senate Energy Committee passed a targeted bill within their committee's jurisdiction, and it got a strong bipartisan vote, 15 to 4. Do you think that will make it over the line in the lame duck?
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh. Every prediction I have made for the last 10 months has been wrong. Right? Oh, I said Kevin McCarthy will never get kicked out, right? It's like it goes on and on. I don't dare tell you what's going to happen. I doesn't feel like it, is from my perspective, and probably primarily because it doesn't have all the parts and pieces that a lot of people would like. Not that it's a bad bill, but that people are just viewing some parts and pieces missing. But that's actually really good news, because if I'm saying it won't pass, that means it's in. Yes.
Representative Curtis, thank you so much for being here with us today. My name is Spencer Toohill, and I work for a small think tank called the Breakthrough Institute. And I am interested in hearing your thoughts on the future of nuclear energy across the United States and in the state of Utah.
Thank you. Wow, can I have an hour? Is that who's in charge here? Listen, I talked about permitting reform keeping us from reaching our 2050 goals. If we don't figure out nuclear, we won't reach our 2050 goals. And you all know this, but let's all blow our minds for just a second. Utah's talking about an AI facility that wants 1.5 gigawatt of constant power. Rocky Mountain Power, when they talked to me about that, said, Wyoming takes 1 gig for the entire state, and you're talking 1.5 gigawatt for one AI facility. We have another facility that wants to do AI in a part of Utah. They are talking 10 gigawatts of electricity. And a lot of people are talking about natural gas, and I get that, but I want to change their thinking to say, you're not going to do nuclear in a year or two, but we need to start thinking about AI facility next to small nuclear reactor, not funded by the utility, but funded by the AI, the people funding the AI. Does that make sense? Because it's a totally different financial model if that's the case. I believe you're going to see not a few, not a dozen, hundreds of nuclear facilities around the United States safely recycling solved, and all of those things. And I think that's going to be part of our energy future. And I think it's going to be an important part of our energy future. And I want to make sure that that technology comes from the United States, not from elsewhere, and that we export that technology around the world. And this is a little bit like permitting reform, where there's a lot of consensus on this. I like to tease my Democratic colleagues. When I first came here, if you could catch them in an elevator by themselves, they would tell you, yeah, we're going to need nuclear. But they wouldn't say it outside the elevator. Today, everybody gets it. We need nuclear, and we need a lot of nuclear. We have to speed up the process. I was at Idaho National Labs just 2 weeks ago, and fascinating experience. And but we have to figure out how to get people there quicker. And as it relates to Utah, UAMPS is a conglomeration of municipal power cities. They gave up because the burden was just too heavy. We have to figure out how, like a muni can bear that burden. Does that make sense? And we've got to take some of those barriers down to entry to make it happen. But I think it's super important. Okay, and I'm watching the clock. One more question. Okay.
Hello? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. My name is Rhiannon Scanlon. I'm with R Plus Energies. We're a renewable energy company based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. This is more of a comment than a question, but I just wanted to say thank you for your support. We broke ground last week on a 400 megawatt solar 400 megawatt battery project in Emery County, which is in your district.
And I'm sorry, we would love to have been there, by the way. But, yeah.
There'll be another one,
Yeah.
but I just wanted to mention that it's the third largest project, and I'm sure in a couple weeks that number will be outdated. But solar renewable energy is happening in Utah, and a lot of that is due to your support, so thank you.
Thank you very much. This is a perfect way to end, because I would like to end with this point. This room represents a lot of diversity in energy sources. We need all of you to be wildly successful. And I like to point out that really all of the energy options in front of us have some Achilles heels. So solar, for instance, is storage. We're getting better and better at it, but we need to get better. Nuclear, it's cost and time. Fossil fuels, it's emissions. And we can't rule out any of these energy sources based on their Achilles heels. We have to help them solve their Achilles heels, because we're going to need, like I say, all of you, not just to be successful, but wildly successful. The demands that are coming for energy mean we need you all. And that's the great thing, right, is that we can work with this. This isn't we win, you lose. This is we all get to win in this energy future. And once again, we have the choice of this emanating from the United States or emanating from someplace else, because it will emanate, and we want it here in the United States. So thank you all. Thanks for your hospitality and giving me a few minutes with you today. You're the best. And now you can do that lengthy introduction if you'd like.
Well, if you want to stick around, right after folks grab lunch, we are doing a panel on nuclear. But folks in the room, feel free to go grab lunch, and then we'll come back here and start the panel to discuss the future of nuclear energy. Thanks so much.